The Babysitters Club. Kristy's Great Idea. Chapter 10. Saturday, September 27. I don't know what Kristy always makes such a fuss about. Watson's kids are cute. Karen is 5 and Andrew is 3. I think Kristy would like them if she ever babysat for them. Are you reading this, Kristy? I hope so. Well, Kristy said this notebook is for us to write our experiences and our problems in, especially our problems. And there were a few problems at Watson's house. When I said Andrew and Karen were cute, I meant they were cute looking. They were cute acting too, most of the time. But sometimes Karen was a pill. That was one problem. Another problem was Boo Boo the cat. The biggest problem was Mrs. Porter, the next door neighbor. Anyone else who sits for Andrew and Karen should know about Boo Boo and Mrs. Porter ahead of time. Watson picked up Marianne at 8:45 Saturday morning and drove her to his house. He lives all the way across Stony Brook, so it's hard to get to his place by bike. According to Marianne, Watson was very nice to her in the car, which was to be expected. He always makes an extra effort to be nice to me, since he knows I don't have him around. So of course he would be nice to my best friend. Marianne says that Watson lives in a very pretty big house. I guess he has a lot of money. He'd have to, the way he throws it around buying Chinese food right and left and taking my mom out on dates almost every night. Anyway, the house is large, and Andrew and Karen have neat rooms. And toys. Marianne had never seen so many. Gigantic stuffed animals, dolls, a train that you could really ride around the backyard, cars, bikes, a playhouse, costumes dressed up in. It was incredible, kind of like being in Toys R Us. Watson turned out to be not only a very good father, but a very organized customer. The first thing he did was introduce Marianne to Andrew and Karen, whose mother had just brought them over. Then he showed her their bedrooms, took her back upstairs, showed her where all the stuff was for making lunch, and finally pinned up a list of phone numbers she might need. And then he brought out Boo Boo. For Marianne told me, Boo Boo must truly be a Boo Boo. What a mess of a cat. He was gray with big yellow eyes that were kind of handsome, but he was fat. Like fat. He looked like a pillow with legs attached. When he stood up, his stomach touched the ground, and when he tried to run, it swayed back and forth. He was gross. He weighs 17 pounds, Karen said proudly. We think he belongs in the Guinness World Book of World Records, remarked Watson. Marianne couldn't figure out why Watson was showing Boo Boo to her. Okay, he was really, really fat. So what? Certainly he didn't need to be fed. Watson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. There are a few things you should know about Boo Boo, he said. Now, Marianne is not the bravest person in the world, and she said that right then she began to feel just a teensy bit afraid. She put her finger in her mouth and bit at the nail. The first thing, said Watson, is that Boo Boo bites if provoked, and scratches. He's an attack cat, added Karen. It's best if you just steer clear of him, Watson went on. I'd offer to confine him while I'm gone, but he doesn't like that much. He gnawed the laundry room door all up, said Karen. Just try to ignore him. Marianne nodded. Whatever you do, don't touch him, added Watson. Marianne nodded again. Well, I guess that's it. Any questions? No, not really. Lunch at 12:30, right? Said Marianne. Right. What about Mrs. Porter, Daddy? Asked Karen. Oh, I think she's on vacation, replied Watson. No need to worry about her. He turned to Marianne. Mrs. Porter is an elderly woman who lives next door. She's a bit on the eccentric side, and Karen is convinced that she's a witch. She isn't, of course, but she doesn't like animals, and Boo Boo seems to have gotten on her bad side. We try to get the two of them apart. Okay, I'm off, kids. Watson kissed Andrew and Karen goodbye. I'll be home by 1:30, he told Marianne. Marianne was just wondering how to entertain her shares when Karen began to talk. It turned out that she was a non-stop chatterer. We're divorced, she announced. Yup, said Andrew. Our parents live in different houses. Yup, said Andrew. He sat down in a little wagon. Our mom is going to get married again. Yup, said Andrew, pushing himself around the playroom. Then we'll have one mommy and two daddies. Yep, said Andrew. He backed into a bookcase. And if your daddy gets married again, then you, how many mommies and daddies will we have, Andrew? Yep. Marianne giggled. Come on, you guys. It's a sunny day. Let's play outside, okay? Oh, great! Exclaimed Karen. I have a new doll. Daddy bought her for me. She hasn't been out in the sun much yet. I think she should get a tan, don't you? Dolls can tan, you know. Of course, they're real anyway. They can do whatever people do. They can draw and break dance, and Marianne was beginning to feel dizzy. Want to play outside, Andrew? Yup. Marianne took the kids into Watson's big backyard. Andrew brought the wagon and pushed Boo Boo around in it. Is he allowed to do that? Marianne asked Karen. Your father said not to touch Boo Boo. Oh, he meant you shouldn't touch Boo Boo. You're a stranger, but Boo Boo knows us. He wouldn't hurt us. Karen paused for a breath and went on. You see that house, the one next door? Marian peered over Watson's rose gardens and between the trees. Next door was a sprawling Victorian mansion with gables and turrets and wooden circles on the porch. The paint was peeling and one shutter was crooked. Marianne said later that it looked dark and scary. Yes, she said to Karen. That's where the witch lives, right, Andrew? Andrew plowed the wagon into a tree and Boop leaped out. Yep, it's Mrs. Porter, and she's an honest and truly witch. Mrs. Porter isn't her witch name, though. Her witch name was Morbida Destiny. The big kids on the street told me so. And she eats toads and casts spells and flies to witch meetings on her broomstick every night. Marianne stared out the house, nibbling away at her nails again. She wasn't sure what to tell Karen. If she told her the stories weren't true, she probably wouldn't get off to a very good start as a babysitter. If she agreed with Karen, she'd practically be lying to her. At least she asked, Do you believe in the stories about more Mrs. Porter? Karen nodded. I have proof. You do? Yep. The proof is Boo Boo. Mrs. Porter made him fat. One day when Boo Boo was nice and skinny, he went into Mrs. Porter's garden and dug up some of her flowers. Mrs. Porter came out and yelled at him and threw a fit. The next day he started getting fat. Yup, said Andrew. So now we have to keep Boo Boo away from Mrs. Porter's house. We don't want her to cast another spell on him. Making him fat wasn't so bad, but she might do something really, really mean. Well, said Marianne, we don't have to worry about it today because Mrs. Porter's not at home. And it was that exact second that Marianne saw a window shade snap up on the first floor of Mrs. Porter's house. A wrinkled face with a big nose pressed itself against the panes of glass. Karen saw the face, too. Ah! She screamed. That's Morbid Destiny. She's home after all. Where's Boo Boo? Where's Boo Boo? Marianne began to feel afraid again. She knew that there were no such thing as witches, were there? The face out the window didn't look very friendly, and Andrew was crying and Karen was panicking. All right, Marianne tried to remain calm. She thought about what Watson had told her, that Mrs. Porter was just an eccentric old lady. Let's look for Poo-Poo, you guys, she said. We don't have to, wailed Karen. I see him. He's... Karen gulped. She pointed her finger. He's in Morbid Destiny's garden. Well, I'll just go get him. Somehow, said Marianne, remembering that she wasn't supposed to touch Boo-Boo, let alone pick him up. She's already gone from the window, Karen cried. She's coming to the door. I know it. Okay, Karen. You're in charge of Andrew for a few minutes. You stay in the yard with him and watch him. I'll be right back. Marian said her heart was pounding as she crossed Watson's yard and stood at the edge of Mrs. Porter's property. Boo Boo was about 10 feet away from her in the middle of some chrysanthemums, digging away happily. Boo Boo, Marian called softly. She glanced at the house. No sign of Mrs. Porter. Maybe she hadn't seen Boo Boo. Boo Boo, Marian called again. Come here. She snapped her fingers. Boo Boo didn't even look up. Yoo-hoo, Boo Boo. Marian stepped closer. Boo Boo sat down and scratched himself. Boo Boo, hey, fat cat. Boo Boo, hey, fat cat, called a croaky voice. Marianne's heart just about stopped beating. She rolled around. As she was whirling, she could hear Karen shrieking in Watson's yard. Behind Miss Marianne stood a witch. Honest to goodness, she told me later, she looked just like a witch from a picture book. Mrs. Porter, or Morbid Destiny, whoever she was dressed in black from head to toe. Her hair was gray and frazzly. There was a wart on the end of her nose. She was carrying what Marianne had first mistook for a broom, but which turned out to be a rake. That fat cat, said Mrs. Porter, shaking the rake with every word, is digging up my mums. I know. I'm sorry. I'm trying to come out for you. Marianne decided to forget Watson's warning. She stepped right into the garden and reached for Boo Boo. Boo Boo hissed and swept at her with his claws extended. Marianne jumped back. That does it, girlie, said Mrs. Porter. She jumped into the garden and waved the rake at Boo Boo. Boo Boo's eyes opened wide. He leaped over a bush of golden mums and streaked away. Luckily, he streaked back into Watson's yard. Mrs. Porter shook her rake after him. "Rapscallion!" she cried. She headed for her house. Marian would hear her muttering things like children and pets and darned nuisance. Back in Watson's yard, Karen greeted Marian tearfully. "Did you hear that? It was a curse." "What was? Rapscallion?" Marian asked, looking nervously over her shoulder at the chrysanthemum bed. "Yeah, no, that wasn't a curse. That's a real word. She was calling Boo Boo a name, but she did not put a spell on him." "Are you sure?" "Positive. Right, Andrew?" "Yep." "I don't know," said Karen. "I don't know." "Look," Marian went on, "did you see more Mrs. Porter mixing up herbs or looking for bats' feet?" "No." "Did you see her crushing toadstools or stirring things in a cauldron?" "No." "Then how do you know she cast a spell?" asked Marian triumphantly. "She's a witch. She can do anything she wa—" "Hey!" shrieked Karen, pointing. Marian's stomach flip-flopped. She immediately looked over Mrs. Porter's yard, sure she was sure she was going to see the old woman flopping across the lawn in her funny black dress. But Mrs. Porter wasn't in sight. Karen was pointing at Boo Boo. "Look at that!" cried Karen. "He's going crazy." Boo Boo did, in fact, look a little crazy, Marian said later, as she watched the cat run part way across Watson's yard, came to an abrupt stop, ran around in circles, then dashed off in the direction he had just come from and scrambled up a tree. "Oh," said Marian nervously, "he's just being a cat. Cats do silly things like that all the time." M- Marian had never owned a cat, so she had very little experience with them, but she had once seen the Pike's cat, Sarge, wake up from a sound sleep, leap off the couch, jump on top of the television set, and immediately fall asleep again. Still, "Boo Boo doesn't do silly things," said Karen, edging toward Marianne. "He's too fat and old." Marianne took Karen and Andrew by their hands. The three of them stood and watched Boo Boo. For a while he looked as if he might go to sleep up in the tree. Karen grew bored. "Psst!" she whispered after a moment. Morbid sees at her window again, and she's looking over here. Sure enough, the old face was pressed against the window panes. Morbida raised her right hand to her nose, and Boo Boo sat straight up, slipped, slid, and finally fell out of the tree, landed on his feet, and shot past Marian and the kids, hissing as he went by. "Oh no!" wailed Karen. Marian squeezed her hand. Boo Boo tore up the steps to the back porch and waited by the door. "I guess it would be a good idea to let him in," said Marianne. "At least we won't have to worry about Mrs. Porter's garden anymore." So Marianne opened the door and Boo Boo ran inside. He ran straight into the laundry room, jumped into the laundry basket, and stayed there while Marianne and Karen and Andrew ate lunch. Every time Marianne checked on him, he peered at her through the sides of the basket and yowled. Marianne started to tell Karen that it was all just a big coincidence, but then she didn't know how to explain the meaning of the coincidence, so she gave up. "Daddy, it's a spell," Karen told Watson urgently as soon as they came home. Watson laughed. "Don't be silly. There are no such things as spells." By then, even Marianne wasn't so sure. She was very relieved to go home.